Our moderator for this session is Ms. Sonja Davidovic, Advisor, Bank for International Settlements. I request you to kindly give her a round of applause and welcome her up on stage. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. We'd like to welcome Ms. Maha Dimachki, Center Head, BIS Innovation Hub, Singapore Center. Let's have a round of applause and welcome her up on stage. We also have amongst us Mr. Alan Lim, Director, Fintech Infrastructure Office, Monetary Authority of Singapore. Welcome, sir. Let's have a round of applause. And finally, we have with us Mr. Siddharth Shetty, Chief Technology Officer, Sahamati. I'd like to welcome him up on stage. Thank you so very much. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. And with this, request Ms. Sonja to kindly take the session forward.
Thank you very much. I think it's fair to say that we're all very lucky and honored, privileged to have a distinguished set of panelists with us this afternoon. We have representatives from the public and private sectors that are key individuals in shaping the future of the financial market infrastructures. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that, because you will see in our panel discussion why I think that we have the key stakeholders assembled here. I'm pleased to have Maha Dimachki, who's the BIS Innovation Hub Singapore Center Head, and we have our Alan Lim, who's the Director of the Fintech Infrastructure Office at the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and Siddharth, Chief Technology Officer at Sahamati. Welcome to the panel. It's great to have you here. I think it's fair to say that we're at the verge of novel developments in terms of what tokenization can unlock, both for financial institutions, but also the end consumer. And so we want to delve deeper into some of the initiatives that have been born out of MAS and BIS Innovation Hub together with private sector partners like Sahamati. So let me turn to Maha first. Earlier this year, the BIS General Manager, Augustin Carstens, and Nandan Nilekani introduced the vision of the Finternet. It would be great if you could tell us a little bit more about what the Finternet actually is, and what does it do? What are the key benefits for financial institutions and consumers?
Great, thank you, and it's a real pleasure to be here today, actually, at this massive event, I must say. It's my first time here at the GFF. So the Finternet paper actually came out about a couple of months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, and the idea of it is a vision, it's a visionary paper, with the friction that we see in the financial services sector at the moment around topics that you've heard everybody talk about at this very conference, and we've been talking about elsewhere, around speed, access to financial services, cost of financial services, particularly payments, but all different financial instruments. I'm finding that there's an echo. I'm not sure if it's just me, and I apologise if that's not it's not clear. So you take this, these frictions, and you kind of combine that with the backdrop of a digital economy. We're looking at an era where digitisation is on the rise. There's increased access through sort of mobile phones. There's increased participation and a desire for getting everybody in society to be, financial inclusion, to be participating in the financial services. And then you've got technologies that are advancing and developing further, such as AI, such as cryptographic technologies. And so with that backdrop, the vision is looking at how can we create a financial system for citizens, for consumers, retail and wholesale, where they are at the heart of their financial lives, they can make decisions, they're in control. And so the Finternet looks at this world where anybody can, transfer an asset, any asset, at any time, of any amount, anywhere in the world using any device. And so it's a big vision. But, visions are big. They're ambitious. And with, the concept of tokenization that Sonja mentioned, and the underlying technology being unified ledgers, this could be achieved. Now, the big conversation is how we're going to get there, and this is really why we're here. And I think, how can everybody sort of participate in sort of getting us there? So that's kind of the big picture vision that maybe our GM, Agustin, and Nandan pulled together. But it's not about one person actually implementing it. It's actually about the entire ecosystem coming together and looking at how this can be achieved. So I'm going to stop there because I'd love to hear from the other panelists on this, and we'll have a great conversation, hopefully.
Thanks very much, Maha. Yeah, I think it's critical to place the user at the center of financial activity. I think that is enabling the end user is a very powerful concept that can truly drive many of the use cases that the Finternet potentially offers to the world. Talking about use cases and industries as in the wider sense. Siddharth, you've been involved in shaping this vision of the Finternet. Can you tell us a little bit more about which industries stand to benefit most from the Finternet, and how does tokenization benefit financial institutions and consumers, and the collaboration between the two stakeholders?
Sure, Sonja, and I'm extremely grateful to be on the panel with you, Maha, and Alan. I genuinely think it's one of the most global panels we've had at GFF as well. And so maybe before I answer your question directly, I'll take a few steps back and talk a bit about why the Finternet, right? And if you look at it from the perspective, let's say in India, where we've been building digital public infrastructure for the last decade and a half, we really saw firsthand the power of giving people control of their identity. When we gave people control of their identity, which was the Aadhaar program, and it was done in a digital manner, you saw people opening bank accounts where traditionally, in 2008, it would have taken us, India, 50 years to get to where we did in 9 years. So we shaved off 40 years of our developmental growth because we use technology within the regulated financial system to expand the market for everyone. We saw the same then when it came to money. Most people had a bank account, but they didn't have control over their flow of money. They would often have to be, like if it was a card, they would have to be in villages. We would see people hand over their card to some other relative because they didn't know how to access the system. They would be shut out from ATMs. It was just too complex for them. And then when in a very simple manner, again using, let's say, smartphones as one type of technology, you give people control over their flow of money, but did it in a manner where there was choice, there was competition, you allowed for the system to be stable because it was built on top of the banking system. We saw hundreds of millions of Indians come into the fold of digital payments, and it's changed all of our lives. But what happened is each of these instances, same with data, the work we've been doing at Sahamati, giving people control of their financial data across banking, capital markets, insurance, pension. But what we realized is each of these programs were highly purpose-specific. And so, you had your own technology, own institutional setup. Everyone had to repeat this time and time again. And that was proving to be siloed. Sectors don't talk to each other. Expensive. If you want people to, let's say, buy a 250 rupee SIP, which is like a $3 SIP into a mutual fund or an ETF, it was not, still isn't possible, it's too expensive. So how do you democratize financial services even further? That's when we realized there was a shift happening. Same with cross-border. When India and Singapore linked our payment systems together, that journey took almost 3 to 5 years after intent was clearly signaled. And if you ask, what is there in a cross-border linkage? You have to agree on exchange rates, capital control norms, KYC norms, a few limits on either side, so on and so forth, maybe a handful of 10 configurations. It shouldn't take 5 years. And so as we started to ask that question, we realized if we shift from building these highly purpose-specific systems that do one thing well, really well, towards a lot more general-purpose, unified architecture, what would that look like? And this is not new. Technology has often done that in the past. All of us that use smartphones today, pre-smartphones, you had your own camera, wasn't programmable. You had your own, typewriter, wasn't programmable. You had your own, individual set of devices, Walkman, that you would put together. Then society realized our needs are much greater than the individual parts. Technology started to unify. Smartphones, operating systems came out. Same with the internet. Everyone had their own internet, their own email client, and everyone said, I can't use anything that's part of the public internet because security, privacy, etc. But we realized the needs were so much greater, we had to unify. So we feel we are a moment in the financial system where different efforts have been happening across the world. And as Maha mentioned, society is expecting a lot more. And hence the Finnet presents a unified vision across giving people control, both individuals and businesses, across different asset classes that might be money, securities, land, vehicles, user-controlled assets like digital content on the internet, but doing that on highly universal infra. So you control, as a financial institution, you control the flow, you permission the flow, but the infra is open and universal. And so that's really the intent. Tokenization, therefore, is the gateway to do that. And really, tokenization is the next evolution. All of you should look at it as the next evolution to digitization. So what happened is when the financial system digitized, if you go back a few decades back, most of the banking was done in a branch-driven manner, nothing spoke to HQ. We then digitized those systems, created co-banking systems, introduced intermediaries to manage that risk that came up in the digitization process, like settlement risks. But that introduced also a lot of inefficiency, because now how do these different systems talk to each other? And so we believe tokenization is just the next evolution, where you can create electronic representations of any asset and fundamentally make that asset transactable. Because today, those assets, your digital copy, the photocopy on the cloud, to put it as simply as that, you can't transact with that, right? It's just a copy. So tokenization allows you to make it transactable. And so the Finnet is really that universal vision, not just for the financial sector, it's for sectors beyond finance. The financial sector participates to flow credit and insurance and so on. But lastly, it's really for sectors outside that are involved in the trade, people building all kinds of new industries that then come on board, carbon credits, etc., to use it and participate in it. And the financial institutions then support that activity.
Yeah, that's another really valuable insight. So in addition to placing the user at the center and democratizing access, we also need to think about unification of ledgers and infrastructures and a universal infrastructure when we think about a future vision of a viable financial market infrastructure. And I like the fact that you weaved in the programmability aspect, because that is a very powerful concept that MAS has been exploring for a number of years now. And it's fair to say that MAS is also contributing to an universal infrastructure in that sense through the Global Layer 1 initiative that you have been working on with other central banks in an international financial institutions. So hopefully you can tell us a bit more now about this initiative. What is the GL1 and how does it fit into the broader financial system? What is your vision and goal for the GL1 in the medium term?
Well, first of all, let me add to the congratulations and appreciation for what a wonderful festival this has been. I think this is my first time here for the FinTech Festival, and it's really been very enlightening and enriching. So picking up on the point about where the Finternet is going, and I think what is the problem that we're trying to solve, if I could use an analogy over here. We are familiar with the idea of roads, we are familiar with the idea of highways, and we speak about the idea of tokenization. If I were to describe, for example, tokenization as a digital representation of value, think about the roads that we have here today. We have private cars, public buses, different modes of transport, bicycles in some countries, more popular than others, and so forth. In a similar way, the infrastructure that we have, the financial infrastructure that we have, some pieces of it are going to be provided by the private sector, some are going to be provided by the public sector. And then Siddharth mentioned this idea of being very purpose-specific. And that's the nature of today's infrastructure. But I think what he has espoused is this vision, maybe on a future state infrastructure where perhaps it's less specific. You don't build a system that's just for a specific purpose, right? You actually have an infrastructure, just like the roads and the highways that we have today. It supports different modes of transport, different types of people that are using the same infrastructure and the highway. And that's the vision of what we are looking to enable with the Global Layer 1 initiative, and how this fits in specifically. So within the Global Layer 1 initiative, we are less focused on actually building the roads itself, the actual technology. I think that's something that Siddharth and the team has been focusing a lot on the Internet. What we are looking at is, if this was such a future, where it's really a general purpose, multi-purpose kind of environment, how would cars actually drive on such a network, such that you don't actually crash into each other, you don't, what are the rules of the road, so to speak? What's the equivalent of wearing a seatbelt, signs to stop, and so forth in such a future state? And that's what we are looking at from as a central bank and as a regulator. What is that global code of conduct, if you would, on such a road? And that could, for example, apply to how an asset is represented, transacted across different parts of the world, foreign exchange is done, or in fact, I'm buying and selling a securities that's issued by one country, but settled in a different currency in a different jurisdiction. Bear in mind that in order for this to scale, we need roads and infrastructure that we all feel safe to drive and use on a daily basis.
Thanks. I really like that analogy, and I think it's a really impactful sort of picture or illustration of how we all play a role on this highway in a way, and what each of the stakeholders' roles are as we're driving down that highway. As you spoke about the highway, it made me think, like, how can that highway that you just described help in the unification of emerging digital islands, as we often refer to, the different closed-loop systems and payments arrangements that countries or regions are working on? How can that highway, maybe starting with you, Alan, the rules that you're working on, how can they bring the different ledgers as envisioned within the Finternet? How can they bring them together? Maybe you can elaborate on that, and Maha as well, and following Alan's intervention.
I'll start with the analogy and then we'll bring it back to what we operate in the financial sector. I guess the equivalent is, if I were somebody that's, let's say, manufacturing a car, I presumably would want something as a core basic element that would serve a variety of markets, right? Intuitively, there's standardization, for example, where the registration number should be, where the steering wheel should be, what kind of engine, and so forth. And that's the equivalent that we are trying to bring over here. So what does it mean? What is a real example in a financial system? For example, how is a tokenized, let's say, money market fund, how is a tokenized corporate bond, for example, represented? How can these different instruments, different assets actually interact with each other? So I think those are things that we need to watch out for. Take that further along, right? I mentioned about this idea of the global international rule, for example. What is the equivalent of wearing a seatbelt and driving safely? It could be, for example, things like how do we handle, let's say, AML, CFT rules, for example, such a way that we allow cross-border transaction to happen seamlessly, such that actually if we are conducting global trade, for example, we don't have to negotiate or re-implement everything from scratch. So those are some areas that we are looking at. Again, focusing more about, how do we keep things safe, but by keeping things safe, just like how you will drive on the road, the fact that you have seatbelts on allow you to move faster, not necessarily to slow you down. That's an area of focus that we have here. What's the global standard for AML CFT? What's the global standard for how risks are managed within the financial system, such that we have assurance even as money or asset is being moved across borders, just like as cars move across borders, we are ensured that we are protected, we are safe as consumer, and we can go as fast as we want to get to the destination that we want.
Great, thank you. Turning to you, Maha, how do you see the Finternet and GL1 come together in this future financial market infrastructure?
Well, I think it's not just the Finternet and the GL1, it's actually everybody playing a role in this because, at the end of the day, we want to have, sound infrastructure, we want to have integration of technology, we want to have interoperability, and we want to have the regulation that contributes to the integrity of the financial system. And we've got to keep in mind that when we look at these new technologies and all of, what we spoke about in terms of unified ledger, tokenization, as these, new technologies that are coming in, we can't forget what we have today. So when we build a new road, we also have old roads. How do they connect? And that coexistence is going to be there for a long time. And so we really need to think about building this bit by bit with what we have today and with how new technologies can really help. And some of that sort of interoperability, and I love talking about interoperability. I think I call it the imperative of interoperability because it's really important to kind of build this and take this step by step and for everybody to know that it's not insurmountable, but we have to kind of all play our part one way or the other. And so if you take existing infrastructure that we have, how can we use new technologies to enhance it? How is it interacting with the new technologies that we're building? So a great example in India is your UPI. Again, I've heard a lot about UPI this conference. But then you've also got your retail CBDCs. And so there is an interoperability layer between those. How does that connect then into a structure that is more cross-border or global? How does that structure connect to another structure that is also a combination of different things in the ecosystem? And this is how the Finternet is going to be built. Making sure that you have the right sort of level of integrity around how it's developing and how it operates, but allowing for the flexibility of what we have today and what we're building to actually contribute to it. Because it's, we can't walk away from this panel, all of you thinking that we're going to build this Finternet over here and everyone's going to migrate to it. So that's a really important kind of point I'd like to pull out. And we can talk a little bit more about some tangible examples, and I'm sure, Sid, you'll have more tangible examples to give as well, to sort of demonstrate that, it's a vision and it's an ambitious vision, but we're all able to play a part in it. So I think I'd love to hear from Sid about some more kind of examples, but you're the moderator. So.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that a key ingredient for the future robust financial market infrastructure is, in addition to the standards and rules that Alan described in his highway analogy, is also the interoperability, not just across different countries' payment systems or digital asset systems, but also with legacy payment systems that still exist. That's something that is critical to keep in mind. And perhaps on that note, Aadhaar comes to mind. It's you could consider it at this point almost a legacy digital public infrastructure, but a very successful one, the largest identity platform in the world, fair to say. So I was wondering, Sid, if you could tell us more about how does the digital public infrastructure like Aadhaar fit into the Finternet vision? How does the old legacy platform connect to a more tokenized ecosystem that was laid out as part of the Finternet vision?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing to understand is what is a token. We just discussed these are electronic representations of different types of assets that allows us to unify. Now, to give an example, let's say for the people that may watch this online, the audio, what I'm speaking, the video that they're seeing, all of that inherently gets converted to a packet on the internet. Everything. Everything that we do on the internet gets converted into a packet, and that was the biggest invention because that packet travels across continents and reassembles itself to create a browser, an app on your smartphone, make it play Netflix videos, whatever, right? Essentially, it's similar thinking now extending to the financial system, where instead of it being these silos, individual infrastructures, can you start to represent it in a unified manner, and then can they interoperate? And so to your question, a lot of the infrastructure that's already been built, many jurisdictions have built solutions for digital identity. And digital identity needn't just be a biometric-backed ID, like in the case of Aadhaar. It could be IDs that become verifiable, like a driver's license and so on and so forth. Any ID that is electronically something that an individual could authenticate themselves against. A lot of countries have built that out. A lot of countries have legacy payment and settlement systems that are there. A lot of countries have other core building blocks. And so many a times when we innovate, especially as technologists, we make the mistake to say what is not there and then we spend all our efforts on that. But it's really important to wear the mindset of what is abundant and then what is something that could be a simple plus one on top of what is already abundant, what already exists. And if each one of us can do that plus one, that's how we built all of the digital public infrastructure in India. Aadhaar was a plus one, UPI was a plus one, account aggregator is a plus one. And so really we see Finternet not as replacing existing infrastructure, but coexisting. So I could use my Aadhaar identity on the Finternet as a form of KYC records. I could use, India has DigiLocker, 8 billion verifiable credentials. I could use that on the Finternet, where if someone is giving me a grant against, let's say, a scholarship grant, I could share my DigiLocker mark sheets that have been issued and digitally signed by the respective academic board and instantly get a verified scholarship grant straight into my account. So how do you use what already exists is extremely important. And so Aadhaar, DigiLocker, UPI can coexist. I can use the Finternet to transact different types of assets while I pay using UPI. So I think it's extremely important that we don't assume that a lot of what's built suddenly will get replaced overnight, but we really see it coexisting and then say, how can what we have plug in? And then what we don't have, how can we leverage that from other ecosystems that have built that out?
I think that is right there another key ingredient to future FMI, which is build value incrementally. Both we heard that from you, Maha, and Sid, and complement, but rather than replace existing systems that work quite well in real life. So it's all about unlocking additional value, the plus one, as you say, as we're moving forward on this journey. I think we're slowly getting all the ingredients together. Now a more practical question, because we heard a lot about talk about the ecosystem and how each of the stakeholders play a role. But how can existing stakeholders like commercial banks or fintechs, payment system operators, and some of them are here in the audience today, how can they get involved in shaping that vision? For example, the GL1, can they just call you up, Alan, and say, like, how can I contribute?
So I think it takes a village, right? I think this is an effort that we are certainly seeking people with the right vision, the same vision to work on it together. We don't have all the answers. And certainly, I would say we welcome inputs and suggestions, and I think part of the reason why we're here is to have that conversation. The other thing, maybe just to build on what Maha has started and also what Sid has introduced, I don't think we are really building the road from scratch. We are really building off what is already there. There are foundational pieces, they are already there. Identity is a very good example of that. Data frameworks, very good example of that. I think what we are also very interested to look at is what are the on-ramps and the off-ramps. I think those are very key pieces. And certainly, I think, again, we are not just on the infrastructure piece. There is existing frameworks that are in place. We just need to look at how they may apply to, let's say, a tokenized world. For example, what are legal frameworks for recognizing a security that's on an infrastructure like that. So I think those are areas that we need to kind of unpack. The other piece that I would also mention is that there's a lot of energy over the last couple of years just on tokenization within the private sector. There's one camp that's been very much focused around scaling and running the infrastructure. That those are focused around public permissionless blockchains. There's a lot of energy there, a lot of hype, a lot of excitement there. But I think one thing that's becoming apparent is that for regulated financial activity, not quite sure whether that would be really the destination to address questions around settlement finality and making sure that you have your money where it should be when you want it. On the other side, I think there's also the energy around infrastructure that are more private and permissioned, maybe more closed-loop systems over there, which has satisfied maybe regulatory requirements, but not necessarily gotten the scale that's required. So I think the road ahead of us is to bring these different elements together. And within the global layer one, and certainly I think other associated initiatives, the vision is how can we harness the learning from each of these areas, whether it's new, but also leveraging what's existing infrastructure, existing way of thinking, existing ecosystem players. I think that's important because even as we are marching forward with a new way of transacting, new way of financial services, I don't think we are necessarily taking, one thing that will not change is the fact that we are not taking away trust from the system, right? That's not going to change. How that trust is delivered or ensured, I think that's the area where we might change, and that's where we need collaboration across different sectors, different countries.
Yeah, another ingredient right there, which is building trust and learning from each other, and it takes a village, it truly does. Maybe one final question before we turn to the audience, who certainly also has questions. To you, Maha, what does the Finternet look like in real life? Is there an idea of how to explain or illustrate it with examples to the general audience, the world? Like, is there such a plan for the Finternet to come to life anytime soon in its incremental shape?
Also, what does it look like? I don't think you can look at something and say, Finternet. I mean, it's the concept, but it's the experience that will describe that we're on the road or we got there. And I think I mentioned in my opening comments about, a transfer of any financial asset anywhere in the world to anybody for any amount at any time from any device. And that's when we start to see more and more of that, particularly on a cross-border basis. I think you can start to see that this is coming to life, and everybody has a role to play. You mentioned this public-private partnership, and the way the financial system works today works very well today in many cases. I think we always talk about the pain points, but let's remember 50 years ago, we were doing paper stuff and, probably in some parts of the world it still happens, but, a bunch of cash on a backpack, on a motorcycle. So that's changing. And we're seeing a lot of advancements, a lot of developments. And let me, again, say one thing. I like to kind of bring it to reality, right? you know, by the time we think, right, we got there, we're going to have to start again because new technologies are coming in, and we're going to think about what the next frontier is going to be. So this is going to be a constant dialogue which needs public-private partnerships, it needs a conversation, and it needs action. Everybody, regulators are responding, commercial banks, fintechs are responding. You're all already playing a part. And I think that needs to continue in earnest, actually, and maybe strengthened. And then the more we see some of these frictions being removed, the ease of doing business and the safety around everything we do, where we started with the consumer, retail or business, is at the heart of this, taking control of their financial lives, then I think we know that we got there.
Okay, I think that is the final ingredient for future FMI, which is it's up to us, really, to all of us individually, to contribute to shaping this vision. It's not just the responsibility of central banks or private companies. Everyone has a role to play. Let me now turn to the audience to see if there's some questions. I realize it's the last panel of the day, so, but yes, Jens, please. Can we have a mic for Jens, please?
Yes, so we'll have a mic sent over to you right away.
Thank you very much. Inside of currency research, we've got the parallel here with the internet. And while the internet provided a common platform, it also resulted in quite fragmented solutions. And I'm thinking specifically about messaging here. Where you've got a WhatsApp messenger, you've got a Facebook messenger, and they don't talk to each other. Is that going to be okay for the Finternet, or do we need to think about how to regulate that as well to make sure that some of these really critical applications will be working together?
Anyone?
Maybe I'll start. So I think that's a very good point. The last thing we want is to reinvent fragmentation. So I don't think that's the objective here. So I think this is where the architecture, as we're describing and developing this, is very important. How do we allow for such an architecture where the base of it's common, such that you can move quite easily in and out of different ecosystems, but yet allow layers above that, whereby whether it's differentiated services, different access rules, etc., that you allow people to actually have that provision, and it could be divided based on jurisdiction, it could be divided based on use case. So that's certainly something that we're looking at within the global layer one. How do we allow an asset to move across different financial network and ecosystem, but yet allow them graduated access, and hopefully we'll be able to share more details on how this could be actually applied. But that's certainly something that we are hoping to solve. Greater interoperability, greater openness with this new financial system, even as we are using more open protocols.
Yeah, just to add on to what Alan outlined, I think firstly the internet isn't a set of platforms, it's actually a set of underlying protocols on top of which platforms got created. Now, a large part of our connections on the internet are interoperable, but as you are rightfully outlined, when it came to social media, when it came to messaging, it stopped. And the reason it stopped is we stopped creating the next set of interoperable protocols. So TCP/IP, www, HTTP were created once upon a time. SMTP for email, you can be on one email client, I could be on another. But we stopped. There are no interoperable messaging protocols. We stopped doing that, and we stopped doing that even in the financial system. Which, however, a lot of the recent advances that have been happening on the cryptographic side, if I put the noise away, there are a lot of foundational technology advances in digital signatures, immutability, how you think of interoperability, aspects like that which are now starting to be solved at a protocol level that will then allow for interoperability even at a platform level, and then you can complement that with regulations. Otherwise, just merely enforcing regulations never really carries forth into the technology. We've seen that fairly recently. And so within the Finnet, we're really looking at it as at the base from a technology standpoint. Of course, there's governance and many other layers. But at a technical level, what are the new set of protocols that allow, as Maha said, the ability for you to exchange assets across any border, any sector, any type, any time, any device, and then allow for new platforms to be built on top. And I think traditionally our mental models have been the internet with one like mega platform, one central platform. I think that's slowly shifting. The ability for people to transact, be on their own platforms, be on their own devices, as long as you have interoperable protocols, I think that's really the direction things are going to shift. And so the main focus from a tech perspective is how do we leverage the technology that's been created and the cryptographic advances and repurpose that primarily with the focus of empowering users. So we did that the same with Aadhaar. Aadhaar was biometric technology that was created post 9/11, used primarily by the US for border control purposes, repurposed it and said, can we use it at population scale for empowering people with their ID? UPI built completely on open source. The traditional financial system for a large while didn't use open source. We took open source, repurposed it, then developed UPI on top. And so within the Finnet, the idea is how do we take a lot of the technology that allows us to have interoperability with people permissioning the flows on top, and then repurpose that with a much more user empowerment lens at the center.
I think all I would say is I totally agree with my fellow panelists, but if history is a predictor of the future, you're probably going to see that in the future. I mean, sometimes it's just different dynamics that are beyond our control. So again, in the spirit of being real, this is a vision. We hope that we'll be more connected as a world. We all talk about it and we will make progress. But will that exist and is it okay? I think it will. Hopefully less so, and I think it has to be okay because we make these decisions. So.
I think that this could be the cherry on top of our future FMI, which is interoperability at the protocol layer. I think has the greatest chance of enabling that interoperability so that we don't end up with a fragmented system. I mean, I'm not sure that that will be the only thing that we need to enable, but certainly a fundamental one that can unlock this value for us. Unfortunately, time is up. I would love to take more questions from the audience, but I encourage you to approach the speakers and ask your questions bilaterally. I think this was a very insightful panel, and I thank you all three very much for helping us shape this future of FMI based on the key ingredients. And we heard about democratizing access, enabling, placing the user at the center of everything we're building, creating rules and standards for how we operate on this highway that hopefully will take us across borders and across different systems, enabling interoperability not just between new nascent systems, but also the legacy systems, and building value incrementally, complementing what already exists, and not recreating and reusing things that are already out there, working with the industry closely, learning from each other, and building that trust, as we all have a role to play in this future FMI. So it's not just up to certain individuals or stakeholders, but we all are creating and shaping this vision of future FMI together. And so with that, I thank you very much and welcome you to, encourage you to approach our speakers directly with any further questions. Thank you.